Welcome to the Northern Powerhouse interview series, where we're unashamedly spreading good news by interviewing Northern businesses and their successes during the pandemic. Subscribe to be notified of new interviews or click the link in the description to take part if you'd like to be interviewed yourself in a future episode. So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories interview series. Today we have with us Chris Raven of Hua. So Chris, thank you for joining us firstly. And secondly, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what your company does and how you help people.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's going to be easy today, isn't it, Chris and Chris? I think, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been an interesting year. We'll get to that, I'm sure. Yeah. So my business is called Hua, and I run it with a business partner who's based in London, actually. But he's probably going to transport himself up to the north in the near future. I think COVID put paid to those plans. But ultimately, we are trying to create, it's always hard for us to describe what we are, because we started off as consultants and we've transitioned into something that is a partner to businesses. And what we're trying not to be is a typical agency, if that makes sense. We're ending up providing similar services. So we build e-commerce websites for people and we help them grow their e-commerce propositions. So we help them do their paid search, their SEO, their email, CRM, all that kind of stuff. But what we don't do is do things in isolation. You know, if somebody comes to us and says they want paid search, we'll typically try and investigate why they think they want paid search and discuss with them a much more holistic solution to what they want to achieve and go back from their goals and what they want to do. So although we are a sort of marketing agency, we tend to describe ourselves as a boutique consultancy. We're just trying to kind of get to the root of people's ambitions and help them figure out the best way to do that. So that's the main activity. The other thing that I do, which is probably worth touching on at some point, is something called Solv. And that is something that I co-founded with a group of individuals last year. And it's a cooperative management consultancy. So we set it up with the premise to basically help startups who have a great idea and have a great maybe product or industry knowledge or great technical capability, but they don't know how to go about constructing the rest of their leadership team with respect to operations and HR and marketing. And basically we have a roster of individuals who can provide that service in a very unified fashion. So that's really me to kick off. I hope that is enough.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much. Fantastic. So I guess obviously all the different industries and service businesses we're speaking to have different experiences of the COVID outbreak. So going back the last 9 months and going through that process, how did it specifically affect you?
It has been difficult. It certainly was. It's been a mixed bag, actually. So we had a lot of established clients last year, and we have great relationships with them and very good testimonials. But ultimately, if COVID impacted them, then it impacted us. So we've had to be very flexible with clients who are under contract. So, for example, quite a few of our clients were in the middle of, say, 6 to 12 month contracts in January, February, March, April. And as a company, we had to take the decision to sort of let them out of those contracts without any kind of penalty, because ultimately they were furloughing staff. They were manufacturing products that they couldn't manufacture because the factories all had to close. They had no workers. So the root cause of us not getting paid is that the business that we're providing a service to isn't making any money. So you're penalising people for coming out of their contract in a COVID situation clearly wasn't the right approach. So I think from our perspective, it was very easy to be flexible like that from a human point of view, but actually from a cash flow perspective, that made us really rethink how we operated and the kind of businesses that we tried to help and support. It's been very interesting. The reason I say it's been a mixed bag is because although we lost clients for the reasons I've just explained, we also, because we live in a world and have done for 20 or so years where we help people with their e-commerce, obviously COVID drove a lot of businesses to consider how e-commerce could benefit their sales and benefit their proposition as a whole. So while we had to pause relationships with some people, a lot of people found us, try and help them. I hate using the phrase digital transformation, but quite a lot of the people we've talked to as a result of the pandemic have been businesses who typically operated two other businesses, and they relied on a field sales network of people out on the road and supported by an office full of people managing those relationships. Clearly that was immediately ceased in February, March. So businesses like that who had some capability to choose this time to invest in what the future looks like for them, they came to us and said, how do we build a direct-to-consumer e-commerce proposition when we have no in-house knowledge or capability? So we went from being a pure service provider, I would say, in a lot of respects, to being a group of people who were implicitly trusted to build and grow an entirely new online sales channel in a digital arena predominantly. Brilliant. For businesses who haven't typically done that, or maybe they sort of had an inkling that it was on their horizon, but it wasn't. It was forced forward on their radar by the pandemic. So I think that's why it's been a mixed bag for us. It's been, on the one hand, detrimental, but on the other hand, really interesting in terms of those new relationships.
It's funny, isn't it? I think most of us have sort of advanced. I think advanced in 6 months what we would have done in probably 6 years, especially in terms of digital, online. Using technology like this, which was obviously available to us but rarely used. And I speak to a lot of people, and our own thoughts were that initial feeling of, you can meet online, but it's never going to be as good. Whereas, my personal opinion is it's probably 80% as good as a meeting. And from what we do and many people we work with, it's probably transactionally probably more effective online, because we've got materials available. We can actually bring things up and share them. Often we don't have them.
Yeah, for all the jokes about Zoom technical problems and all the different microphone and video combinations that you need to operate in Zoom, Teams, Google Hangouts, etc. Actually, they're probably all less than turning up to a client's and then scrabbling around for an HDMI cable to plug your laptop into their conference room TV. So I agree. And for us, because we came from a consultancy background, myself and my business partner, particularly I'm talking about here, my pattern, I live in rural North Yorkshire, and my pattern was that I'd work for clients maybe a day in their office, and that could have been Glasgow, could have been Leeds, could have been London, it could have been Plymouth. But then I'd do more days for them from home, and I kind of have a shed in the garden, which is a shed with power and fibre as a sort of decent office away from kind of kids' interruptions. So my pattern was quite regularly digitally native anyway. We'd talk on Zoom, we'd operate on Trello boards or Asana boards. The processes and the patterns for me haven't changed very much, but when you transition from being a kind of long-serving consultant, so I was like chief marketing officer basically for interim for a number of people, or consultancy for a number of people. When you transition from that to running a kind of bona fide agency with many people involved, either as employees or freelancers or as a business partner, actually what that does in periods like this is not only refine how you look for clients and how you operate with clients, but it refines how you develop the process to do those things. So your standard operating procedures all have to become tighter. If you're winning clients and holding workshops on Zoom and never meeting them before the first part of things are delivered, which is exactly what the last 9 months have been for us, that's really strange, because certainly you would, if you're talking about sort of larger projects, there'd certainly be a period where you met with people and kind of looked them in the eye, and so that they could gain the trust from you, that they know that they're paying you to do a job, that you're going to actually come up with the goods. And I think that has reflected itself in longer sales cycles for us, I would say. I think decision making for people who are embarking on, particularly those more involved digital transformations, because there's so many components to that kind of thing. I think what we've seen is not a reluctance to commit, but almost a client. You can see the client's cogs turning in every respect, because they want to understand as much as they can about every piece of the puzzle, and every point that they're going to need to trust you on implicitly, and every point that they're going to need to feed in. So I think, you know, that cycles back into how we've refined our standard operating procedures, because what we've had to do is maybe elements where we'd have taken a bunch of materials to an office and presented it and talked through it and done all of that buy-in in a day or half a day. Actually, that has had to become part of a more complex proposal, Zoom workshop, further discussions, further workshops, project planning, product specification, you know, all of that specifying and planning and project management steps. They've almost become pre-commitment now, whereas previously, I think in our world, they would have been, cool, they've signed, they've paid a deposit, that stuff's now where we start. It's become the other way around. We've had to demonstrate capability and process ahead of commitment, which I'm fine with. I'm generally fine with. It just has an impact on cost of sales and has an impact on management time if projects don't come to fruition. So I think there's a higher degree of risk for people like us, but also we are pushed to provide a better and more comprehensive initial service. It's hard to describe, but I think you know what I mean.
No, I think the key thing that you're highlighting is it's about, for me, it's about adaptability. The marketplace has changed, and if we try to operate in the same way as we operated before, we're probably not necessarily going to be as successful at the there's a phrase: if we always do what we always did, we'll always get what we always got. A friend of mine upgraded that quite a few years ago and said, if you always do what you always did, your history, because the world is changing, and even before COVID, the world was changing, and that's why the likes, going back a long way, Woolworths, MFI, they went by the wayside because they weren't serving the changed marketplace. And
that actually, there's like a weird dichotomy in that from a people perspective, because I've transitioned from being a consultant to being an agency owner. I've kind of gone in cycles from being agency owner to consultant, but now I'm an agency owner again. And we did that, and we've set ourselves up on a tangent that is good. While that's been happening, the world has ejected a load of talent from businesses because they couldn't pay them anymore, they couldn't furlough them, the business wasn't resilient enough to cope with the pandemic. So the market is flooded with really talented consultants, and everybody's almost fighting for the same sort of business. So I think you also have to factor that in, because we don't see that as competition. So we look at that and we try and help those people if we can, because not all projects are going to be right for us, but they are going to be right for those consultants. So we've I think one of the reasons why we've perhaps had a better run than to some others over this last 9 months is because we started it off by looking within our network and looking at who'd become available and who was no longer employed, and seeing where we could support. And I'm not trying to self-aggrandize. This is actually what we did. Instead of doing lead gen, we went, okay, who can we connect them with? Because they know, I think they can help that person. Or we know that there's somebody in need of design. They don't need all the stuff that we do, but they do need design. And we've got our designers on roster can do that without us involved. So let's connect them. And we did loads and loads of that. And that payback, is that kind of paying forward thing is starting to come back around, which isn't really why we did it. But I think that whole premise of supporting the network that while trying to find a new network to complete and support, that is very, very virtuous. We do that for other people. People do it for us. And I think that has been a real positive transition, because I don't think necessarily was like that in 2019, 2018.
No, I'd agree. I think we did similarly. We just went out and said we just need to help people. One of our goals for our business is to create 1,000 jobs in Yorkshire, and that transitioned into save 1,000 jobs, or save as many jobs we can of 1,000. So we went out and helped as many people as we could, irrespective of any commercial agreement or payment.
Right.
And similarly, and I've spoken to a lot of people about it, and everyone says, look, people don't forget that that's an investment in the future. And I think the phrase, one of the phrases coined by our founder was, the more I serve, the more I deserve. So although it's not the intention, and it has to be decoupled, it's likely the more we focus on helping people and being abundant with our help and support, the more likely we're going to get that feedback in the future. But it's a risk, because it's a gamble. There isn't any connection. There's no agreement. So
yeah, it is, but it's not really that far removed from posting content in blogs that explicitly tells people how to do stuff. It's a bit more personal, and that tactic, if you like, has worked for a couple of years for a lot of people, either to gain exposure for their companies or to kind of act as a form of lead gen, but ultimately that's what it is. It isn't an altruistic, I'm giving away information for free. There are some people doing that for sure, but not, I don't think it's as prevalent as it appears. But this year it feels the opposite to that. It feels like people have gone, is there, like that LinkedIn post that sort of cycled all over a couple of months ago, which was about, is there anyone in my network I can connect you with if you're out of work, if you're looking for work, all that stuff, I think is, that's going to pay back to people in time, but it's definitely not done with that premise. They've not done it with that in mind.
If we call it the law of precession, actually work at 90 degrees to the outcome you might want. If you focus on the outcome, if you focus just on making money or profit, it typically eludes us. If you focus on something like helping people create quality, various other things, that is the roots of success that ultimately other things turn up, like profit and cash, etc. But if you focus on it, it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's one of the reasons why I co-founded Solv. So it's worth just talking about that a little bit, because with Solv, actually the commercials came very, very much second. And what we set it up with a mission for changing the world for the better. I sort of kept finding or being put in touch with startups who had great ideas, like literally people who were trying to create enzymes to break down plastic in the oceans, or to that kind of thing. We kept getting introduced to people and didn't really have the framework to support them in the way they needed. So with Solv, we pulled these 12 or 15 people together, and everybody had the same ethos. And we were sort of talking about it, and we were like, okay, well, we can't have all the ideas for these products and things that are going to make the world better in terms of social mobility and poverty and environmental improvement and sustainability and power generation, all those things that society as a whole globally is facing. We can't have those ideas in isolation, but what we can do is go, well, what's our pooled resource? We've all done 20 years in this discipline or that discipline or that discipline. So what's our pooled capability to help startups? And having worked for quite a few startups in a kind of CMO standpoint, often the problem was people trying to hire in Series A or Series B funding rounds, very, very high caliber individuals on high pay and probably equity options to come in and form this leadership team. Often that didn't work for lots of reasons. One, because when you do that, you end up with a massive wage bill and your cash burn is very high.
Yep.
Two, you're forcing people to try and build a dynamic. You've hired loads of people in isolation, and then you're trying to get them to build a dynamic. So that's happening in parallel to your product creation or your vision. You're bringing your vision to fruition. often if you hire high caliber individuals like that, they want to put their own mark and their own stamp on something, which is absolutely right. But is it right if you've joined a Series A or Series B startup and the founder has a very, very refined vision which they want to bring to fruition? All that does is create a sort of clash interpersonally often. And so when that happens, you tend to see somebody eject, and then they're back in the cycle, like a long latency cycle of trying to source, interview, shortlist, and decide on new C-level candidates. So with Solv, we went, okay, well, we can strip all of that away and just provide the leadership support in the functions that people need it, when they need it, for a monthly fee. No equity, probably less than one person's wage bill, if I'm honest. And we already have a dynamic because we all work together on other projects.
Yep.
We are all super high caliber, so we can get right in and adapt to what you need. So that premise came first, and then we thought, okay, how do we make it work financially? What do we need to charge? What do we need? How do we need to commercialize it? And what does that look like? So, that has been a really super enjoyable journey for me, because I've kind of driven the FCA approval, and we've wholeheartedly embraced the kind of cooperative, the mutual society approach, and we bank with the cooperative bank, and everything in that ethos is supported by how you do your business and how you view the resources that you use and how you view your impact on the world. So I'm kind of really proud of that, but that is a slow burn business, shall we say. We were really hoping to hear about some positive news from the Leeds Enterprise Partnership about a grant to help build some jobs and build that proposition in the new year. But unfortunately, they've decided to not go with us because we didn't really. They felt we would have set a precedent for them to open up their grant funding program to consultancies, which I totally understand. I think we were pitching something different, but it when you go through these application processes, it's not, there's no black and white. It's very much tell your story and see if it resonates.
Yes.
And we're okay with not getting the grant funding. It wasn't pivotal, but it just means that our 2021 commencement for Solv might look a little bit different than had we achieved that. Hopefully they've given that money to other businesses that will kind of utilize it in the same sort of way, creating jobs in the region. We were very focused on the north, so this is a very an apt interview to sort of discuss that. But I think that journey has definitely been eye-opening in lots of ways, and I've worked with some colleagues on that project who are from Big Four consultancy innovation, from New York arts and culture. People who've spent their lives striving for excellent people management, people who've lived in ops and marketing and creative zones for such a long time, and seeing all those people bring to the table their expertise in a way that has no ego attached, is purely how do we make this mutually work. The thing about a mutual is, if you create success for your clients, that's your success. There's no other route. And if because everybody owns a bit of the business, there's nobody sitting there going, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Can you do that? It's all very much understood that your effort goes rewarded when everybody's effort goes rewarded, and everybody's effort is needed. So it's been a really interesting, a thing to do, which is very different from creating a business where you have an idea, you build a brand, you create it, you're the MD or the CEO, you go and hire people, you go and recruit, and you build a team. It's such a different route that it's really been, I think, a very interesting thing for me to do in the last few months.
Fantastic. So that's mainly come about through this period.
It was burgeoning as an idea last August, and I did a course called the Alt MBA, which is run by a marketer called Seth Godin from the USA, so that was an interesting. I did that in January before we even knew that the pandemic was a thing, really, and I think that experience was very much a point of transition for taking the idea that I'd had into something that bred reality. You know, I used the idea of Solv to take through this Alt MBA process, and it got rebranded during that, and it found people to be part of it during that, and it just got challenged in all the best ways, and it became a bigger and better thing as a result of it. And I think, you know, when we finally launched it, it was very, very apt for the pandemic time and for the pandemic feel. And I think that the future of work is heading in that direction. I just don't think the world in 5 or 10 years, the world of work, certainly in digital and the world that we're talking about in this interview, I think that world won't look like groups of people getting together in offices to do things and sit at their desk 9 to 5. I just can't. There will be a bit of that, but I just don't think it will continue to be that dynamic. So I think we have to think a bit differently, and hopefully I'm helping contribute towards that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating. I certainly believe personally things will be different, and that there are things it might be, you know, touch a bit further on that, but you know, adjustments that people have made that they continue to make, and I'm speaking to people all the time that don't expect ever to have everyone back in their office at the same time. Interestingly enough, we're seeing quite a lot of businesses where team are asking to come in because of the social side, I think, of coming into an office, but not just 9 to 5 to do the work. It's like, I'd like to come in. I can do probably more work often by working from home because I haven't got the travel associated with it. We're doing that. Interesting of Seth speaking at our Business Excellence Forum next year. We're flying him over. Hopefully, COVID permitting. I think our conference is normally in April, so I guess it's a little bit of wait and see. But hopefully we're speaking there. So
fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, he's great. Wonderful author and speaker.
Just on one thing that you said there, if you don't mind, I think there's a really interesting point there about the people that weren't accustomed to working digitally and working remotely in this space. I think there's a huge, it's probably the 80-20 rule. There's probably 80% of the UK's workforce who've been forced into home working have suddenly had to deal with the ability to work for longer hours without realizing it, because they aren't set to parameters by traveling to and from somewhere. And I think that they've also had to, in a lot of cases, suddenly deal with isolation. So that is one thing that I don't think is talked about enough, is that kind of mental health aspect of making sure that you find a way in a lockdown situation of being able to engage with other humans, and maybe Zoom is okay for that in some respects, but I think there has to be, I don't have a solution for that, but I think, that kind of mental and physical health element where you've suddenly removed somebody whose pattern was get on their bike and commute 5 or 8 miles to an office, speak to people all day, and then ride home. Like you've totally eliminated two of the mainstays of their life, and I think that's been very difficult for people, I think.
I really, totally agree. It's interesting. Certainly, seeing people coming out of the second lockdown, the real desire to get back to work, physically, has been quite significant for people that aren't used to it, as you say.
I wonder if there's a balance. I wonder if there's certainly I would see companies embracing a much more flexible pattern where they definitely have an office environment that is available, but maybe it's not open every day, or maybe people don't have to go in every day, or because I think that. So one of the big things that we were talking about Leeds Enterprise Partnership with Solv was how they kind of manage that reopening of city centres, where you can't suddenly expect a return to the same influx of volumes of people, and where businesses have not been able to keep up on their office payments and suddenly don't have a premises, so there's loads of empty buildings. What do you do in that situation? There isn't simply going to be the capability for a lot of businesses to reopen their offices and re-engage with their staff, even if they've managed to keep their staff because of furlough schemes or whatever. So I think there's a kind of much bigger challenge at play there, and I don't know whether that's solved by co-working spaces or a more shared workspace proposition. It might be. That sounds good to me, but not to every company.
No, I guess what it highlights is a whole new market for services, training, even potentially, I guess, sort of counselling type services for people to deal with the mental issues of not coming into work every day. Because, there's a small part of the business community like yourself that is perhaps used to it for a longer period, but, there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have to deal with that change and understand that change.
Yeah, and it would be lovely, like in the ideal world, I feel like that would be really nicely served by independent outfits that create places with personality. Like I think there's been some big winners in e-commerce in this pandemic, people like Amazon and the supermarkets, and there isn't a generalized amazing uptick in e-commerce. Actually, some smaller vendors are really struggling for lots of reasons. But to frame that in the space dynamic, I personally feel like it wouldn't be brilliant if larger companies that already own national chains of office space for hire or co-working spaces. It feels like them reaping the benefits of this is not the way that serves a future with longevity. It feels to me like there needs to be, like I say, like independence. So do you know the Northern Affinity? Have you come across those guys? Michael
yes. Yeah.
So Michael Edwards and his team, they run a conglomerate, I think, of co-working spaces or spaces that can be purposed into multiple things. So I think that's a really kind of neat solution, a neat idea, and I think he finds people who already have successful independent spaces of that nature and then supports them with a wider network rather than trying to acquire and grow and scale in a singular dynamic. So that route feels quite interesting to me.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how things go. We have got a bit of a capacity as human beings to revert to norm, and I'm not always for the best, really. So it'd be interesting to see in a year, 2 years time how many people have kept this sort of, because most people that I speak to see it as a positive. The big part of it is the positive of not having to spend an hour, 2 hours in the car every day to go somewhere where I could work just as well. There's so many positive. The environment benefits from not, lack of pollution. There's so many benefits of this, and yet we unfortunately, as a human condition tends to gradually go back to where we were. So let's hope.
Yeah, I wonder how flights will recover. Business travel. I think that's one interesting area that takes us out of our kind of UK remit or region. Because I definitely was on plan to go to a few events over internationally. So I was trying to, right when the pandemic kicked in, I suffered some EasyJet losses, shall we say, as a result of having to cancel a couple of tickets to Paris. And this summer was supposed to be a trip for my business partner, also called Chris, unbelievably, to go and fly to Seattle and ride Harley Davidsons all the way down the West Coast and end up in San Francisco. Clearly, we haven't done that.
Lovely.
Weirdly, we have quite a few clients in North America, and they're all sort of Western seaboard. So that was one of those trips that could have been legitimately work related, but just molded into a very enjoyable construct. But yeah, I think realistically, when's all that kind of stuff gonna start again? It's it's totally gone from my radar. I think, I don't even think it's not a 2021 thing. I don't even know whether that would be a 22, 23, 25 thing for me personally. There seems like there's so much to do here.
Yeah, that's it. It is a shame. I mean, I always ask people what they're looking forward to in the future, and probably 80% are talking about traveling again. Not for business, but personally, holidays and all those things we sort of have missed. But who knows, as you say, whether a downturn in travel will mean a lack of availability. Even, I mean, I can't imagine that being the case. But airlines have got to run a different business model, I imagine.
Well, that's it. And hasn't this? I mean, you just touched on it a minute ago. Hasn't this framed the environmental impact of that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Like, actually, should we be being more considerate or more frugal with the way that we approach international travel? We've sort of become accustomed to the world not being, to nothing being particularly far away. A couple of days away at the most, and maybe that's not the right mindset for the next decade and on. I don't know until we get something that doesn't hoover up fossil fuels to make those transport journeys. I don't know whether that's an answer, but it's something that's on my mind. We've been saving as a family to go to Disney World. The children aren't really old enough yet, but by the time they are old enough, I'll probably just about have enough money. But when that time comes, will that option even be on the table for us? I'm not sure. It's tricky to predict.
It is. I do hope there is ongoing radical change, because I think the norm we're in wasn't particularly effective or healthy for most of us and all the planet. So I hope there's some significant change. It's interesting. We're talking, obviously, unfortunately, a lot of people are talking the likelihood of a recession that will follow the outbreak, which I guess is probably inevitable. I hope it doesn't, but it probably isn't. But you mentioned Disney. There's a great. I love my quotes, and there's a quote from Walt Disney from when pretty much early doors when he founded Disney, that he said, "I've been told there's a recession coming, but I've chosen not to participate."
Love it. Yeah.
And just think, there's a big mindset issue of, yes, okay, a recession is probably likely, and it is an economic likelihood and fact, but there's still business. Recession is in general no more than a 10% reduction in GDP, which if you flip it on its head, is a 90% of our customers are still buying. Even on average industries, obviously different industries effective. So if that's the case, small and medium-sized enterprises can still have a plan to grow significantly, even in a recessive cycle.
Yeah, and the individual enterprise as well, which I guess feeds into your kind of business model quite well, if I read it correctly. I've certainly been in touch with lots of my friends and acquaintances and wider network who've definitely either expressed an interest in becoming a coach in some respect, or have actually made a transition, a successful kind of commencement of being a coach in some form or another, and I absolutely advocate that for those individuals. But have you seen an upturn in sort of the people that you've been able to help?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Chris. The first thing we've seen is we've had a lot of positivity around us, and I think part of that is the people we attract, because we're very much of a positive mindset. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So that's something we progressed with. So have we seen? Yeah, people need help, and I think people in general need leadership as well. They need to. They will associate themselves with people that have a plan, have some surety in whatever industry, and that includes whether that's coaches or whether it's consultants. If people want some, we've had enough lack of surety and therefore lack of security, and people that feel like they're leading are attracting people. So yeah, we're helping a lot. As I said before, we're helping a lot of people that unfortunately at the moment can't commercially afford what we do, so we're helping them anyway, because we know that will pay us in some way in the future. But we're seeing, again, people with a positive attitude. We've had businesses in different spaces, but a marketing business or a marketing type business worked primarily in travel. In fact, travel was part of the title of the business, lost 2/3 of the business in a 4-week period, but just decided, and of all the people I work with, he's probably the one that I would have said, look, if you just want to put your head in your hands for 6 months, I don't blame you. But we just started 4 other businesses in different sectors that they had some experience in, and now has doubled back up to the 2/3 of their business. And when travel comes back, that additional business is going to grow. When travel comes back, that business is going to double, treble in its size. So
yeah, I've seen similar. I've got a friend I used to work with a long time ago called Kate Holroyd, and she runs a company called Strawberry Holidays that they do sort of bespoke holidays for people. I think she's based in maybe the Lancashire area or north anyway. But I've seen her transition from being, having all her bookings gone to being somebody who's prolific in that positivity around the travel industry, and having found new ways to serve her client base and keep her business basically very buoyant throughout a period where people can't fly and move around so much. So I think that those are some of the most impressive and inspirational stories. I feel like the businesses that I operate in, the people that I work with, we are definitely positive. We have super positive mindsets. We also recognize, that there is a challenge, and I think we're trying to be emerging leaders of the future. I wouldn't say that we're accomplished leaders right now. We definitely have a plan. And the quote for me is the A-Team quote from Hannibal. I love it when a plan comes together. Do you know what I mean? Just need the cigar, but we're at that stage. Like, I feel like quite a few of our plans have come together, and 2021, like for us, we're talking in excited terms about what 2021 may bring. If there's a vaccine, great. I think that will boost things for us in terms of other people's mindsets, the people that we're dealing with and people we're talking to. If there isn't a vaccine and we have more lockdowns, we've kind of coped with 2, so we'll carry on. We're not. That's not going to break us. Nothing is. We'll just find, like you say, something else to do, some small diversification. When all this started, there was so much noise around every business having to pivot, and I just thought that's nonsense. And we at Solv, we tried to bring code to the world with a hashtag adapt, not pivot. Because I think a lot of businesses just needed to do a bit of tweaking. And they didn't. Absolutely was wrong for a lot of businesses to pivot, and it would have broken them. Whereas small adaptations were enough to bring them through.
We were probably guilty of using the word pivot too much ourselves, but from my perspective, although pivot, you're right, it suggests a very significant change. It was, primarily it was just about being open to and changing in some way, whether large or small. So I agree. Some businesses just needed to change things. Some really and did just enhance and work on their online e-commerce, because they had a successful retail business and never got round, a high street type retail business, never got round to the e-commerce side because they were too busy. So that wasn't, as you rightly said, that wasn't a pivot. It was just let's just sell online. But
the pivot, if they suddenly go, well, you know what, we won't do anything offline anymore. Our entire business is now online, and we have no offline proposition. I don't know of any examples of that.
No, and I would agree that wouldn't be sensible until we know what the new normal looks like. It might be ultimately the right thing, but right now I totally agree. It's not massive boots in change, but in most circumstances, it's just what are the adjustments, what are the changes. I think the massive adjustment, probably the bigger adjustment, is in people's mindsets to embrace the change rather than fear it.
And that's absolutely true. And I would say that's probably our biggest challenge overall, is because when you move from, I'm talking purely in a digital transformation context, when a business has built themselves up and they may be like group owned or single owned or co-owned, and they may be 150 million pound business, and they've been operating B2B. They know their industry, they know their products inside out, they know what they're doing. They are super smart, super high caliber, and they've got to that point at a certain margin and at a certain level of investment. And when you start talking to them about what the investment is for direct to consumer and what the margins might be when you amortize everything across the marketing spend that they might need to compete in keywords against competitors, or to make sure they've got the right website in place, that becomes the hardest decision for them, because it's not about just opening up a new sales channel. It's the realization that actually the dynamic of that sales channel is very different to
Yes.
the one that they already operate in.
Yes.
So it's not just about creating new resilience. It's about accepting that resilience comes at a different type of cost. And I think that's some of the conversations have been not difficult, but just that's, we're not educating people on how to do marketing, or what the marketing should look like, or what their tone of voice should be. There's a bit of that, but it's mainly about, okay, when you operate digitally, it's different to what you currently do. That's the kind of level of education that we're having to talk to, business owners about. It's not.
Yep.
It's a very interesting discussion to have with people, and they don't always come round. We don't, particularly if they are deeply established. If they're a 20, 30-year-old business,
Totally
harder.
And it is, and we know. I mean, we know that for ourselves. Anything we've been doing for 20 years, it's going to be difficult to change. But it's a question of whether we need to. I like the idea that the mind's like a parachute. It works best when it's open. So so looking at, we obviously looked outside a lot, but looking internally, what have you learned about yourself as you went through this period?
Good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I think you've stumped me a little bit. I've learned that I don't miss getting on the train to London, so I'm happy to try and drive as much business in the north and as much power to the north as I possibly can, so they don't have to go back into that pattern ever. Because I think the fundamental change there is that I get to spend more time with my kids and my wife, and they're 3 and 6, so
wonderful.
It's a great time to have more time with them. I have learnt that it's hard to be physically and mentally resilient when the forests are closed for mountain bikers,
right?
Because actually that's a mainstay of how I keep myself sane and give myself thinking space. You need to detach from the stuff that you're doing at your computer, because better ideas come when you're engaged in something else. And for me, that's mountain biking. I've done that for so long it's almost like habitual, second nature. You get on your ride, that's where the mind parachutes, and you start thinking of new stuff. I wish I had a little helmet microphone. Sometimes you could just go click and then start talking about ideas to yourself. Maybe that's the definition of insanity. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think here's something that I never thought I'd yearn for, is the ability to conduct public speaking again. So I'm not particularly afraid of that. I'm not particularly terrible at it if you've got the right story to tell. I wouldn't say I ever particularly enjoyed it, but I think there's a space where webinars just don't fulfill to the same extent as being able to engage with a group of like-minded individuals in person. So I think that's interesting, and you also don't realize how much of a catalyst that engagement is to future business as well. I think we knew that it was a good sort of leads and people to talk to, but I don't think we really quite understood how much of a factor that was. So I think that that's something that I don't miss but do miss, public speaking. What else? I don't know. I think just that I have to be, yeah, okay. So I think the final one for me is I've come to a realization that I need to love the product that I've created as well as the journey, or as much as the journey.
Yeah.
So I'm of the mindset that I get very excited by new and shiny and creating that new and shiny. And I think what this year has done has forced me to create new and shiny, but then also make them more shiny as the process grows. And I'm talking about Here and Solve. You know, those businesses. I love to create businesses, create ideas, and I think that the difference in being a future leader or making something successful that's not just for yourself, that has other people at heart, is being able to provide continuation of that thing that you've created, rather than just that entrepreneurial spirit of creating something and then moving it on or doing something else or diversifying a little bit more. I think the reality of having to you pay all your bills and factor in other people on maybe a third of what you have previously been earning. That's the reality of this year for us. We've still been successful, but I would say it's, it doesn't even compare to previous years.
Yes.
That for me means that you have to double down on everything that you're doing and not keep starting new stuff, which has been I think that's been an interesting learning for me personally this year. And probably one that I've struggled with the most, if I'm honest, mentally, finding resilience in creating something really strong is very, very rewarding in itself. But actually that's harder than just creating new things or creating new things to a certain level and then moving on. Actually creating something to one level and then making it, almost forcing it to be bigger and better, I think is harder, but is more rewarding in some respects.
So sometimes we need to, also build the team around us that can take that on, and it, I think the more we can be multidisciplinary, the better. However, sometimes it's okay to say, look, I'm a creator, not a finisher. Or sorry, that's anybody. I'm not suggesting that's you, but we surround ourselves with people that can take it on. And I know we've done that in a few, just personally experience with a few clients where the original owner was the creator, brilliant vision, brilliant strategy. But once the business got it onto more of a plateau of that continual growth, we needed to bring a pilot on board, a jockey that was more than capable of fulfilling that, and that works quite well in some cases. In other cases, people can develop the skills to take it further themselves. But it's that introspection, isn't it, of being able to recognise it in ourselves and be open and honest.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's also linked with being comfortable with asking for help, and also being comfortable with trusting that other people will take it on in a way that you maybe wouldn't, but that it'll still be right. It's just because it's not your way doesn't
mean even better sometimes.
right, probably better, if you've found the right people, and I think that has been a key focus of this year is just not I don't know how to phrase it really, but basically understanding that you can't and shouldn't control everything. Not that I particularly had a desire to, but I think maybe it's more about the fact that the networks provided the right people to support in the right places. So it wasn't really, not necessarily about control. That's why I hesitated, because it wasn't really about control. It's more about just the right people being at play in what you're trying to achieve. And I think that extends not just to the Solv cooperative, but it extends to having a trusted network of people that you are suddenly able to re-engage with, even if you haven't worked with them for the last 5 years, but that they're really good at what they do. And you come into a zone where you're providing a holistic service for clients, and you're able to go back to those people and say, I need those services now. Are you up for doing some projects? And they're like, absolutely. And and that you can just give them the work, the brief, and they will bring it to life in a way that nobody else can. And I think that's fundamental to some of our success, is having those people around us.
Yeah.
So the more people I can find like that, the more people that we can work with like that, the more people we can refer to that can then refer back to us if the time arises, all that stuff. It's back to that. And we started with networks, didn't we? And it's back to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just reliant on human networks, even if we have to do it all by Slack, Trello, email, and Zoom.
Absolutely. That's just the adaptation, isn't it? But I think, what we often see is that leaders with strong vision and a strong purpose will attract the right people. So, that it is a factor of being clear on where you're going, what you want to achieve, how you want to get there. Because the people are there in general, it's just us attracting them at the right time to deliver. And then, as you said, and then trusting, because it is and I take your point about control isn't necessarily a control thing, but it's probably more about a lack of control, the fear of a lack of control rather than a need to control, if that makes sense.
I totally get that. But I think for me, if I know what that person or that I'm handing off work to, if I know what they can do, then the trust overrides the lack of control.
Totally, absolutely.
So,
I think the job of a leader, someone told me a while ago, the job of a leader is not to be a superhero, but to recruit and lead a team of superheroes.
Yeah, I want to work with people who outskill me in every respect. Do you know what I mean? Like I have no problem with that.
100%.
I had a business mentor for the first time in my life this year. I've wanted one for a while, but I've not I guess put the processes in place to actively go and find one. And I found one this year. I'm not sure whether our agreement allows me to mention his name. So if you ever watch this, you know who you are, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention you. But he's been enlightening for me. I've really enjoyed. We haven't had loads of contact, but what we have had has been super useful. And he introduced me to a framework called the Entrepreneurial Operating Standards, the EOS system. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I didn't know it before. But it's one of those ones that I'm a bit skeptical about all these different frameworks and things. And I've used lots of them over the years, Link Canvas and all those kind of things, and they all have their place. But I felt like this EOS really had a steering input for me. I've not adapted it wholesale. I don't rely on it, but it's definitely got an edge when you wrap the elements around your business and you say, okay, because actually a lot of it is fundamentally about right people doing the right thing. And how does that link to your direction? And what do you stand for? And when you wrap that together with your processes and your marketing outreach, that's your business. And what it looks like. And I think that we sort of had all those elements in some form or another, whether they were down on paper or in people's heads or somewhere in the ether. But having some kind of framework to connect the dots on those was useful for me, at least. And I think, I think if you're trying to lead something, even if you're not, I wouldn't class myself as the leader, but of Solv, for example, or here, because it's also mutual. But I think if there's somebody driving some background element of the business, then I'm kind of comfortable doing that and trying to provide the framework of that vision for people to latch onto and evolve, or to challenge and create something better from. But yeah, that's that person particularly, having that business mentor through this pandemic, I think has been a useful component of my positive mindset.
Brilliant. Well, that's been absolutely fascinating in so many different levels. Really appreciate your time, Chris. I guess, we've opened up so many different themes of thought, etc. I guess what would just to close on what in a few words, what you see the future like for yourself and for your businesses.
So for here, our aim is to just do really, really good work for people, and have them talk about us in a way that we would want to be talked about. I think the reality is that the world of finding new clients that dynamic has changed radically over the past few months, and the strongest way that we can do that and build longevity for that business is to, like I say, do brilliant work for people, grow their businesses for them, and have them talk about us in that context to their peers and to the wider network, and that's how we like to be known. So with Here, that it's really that, and with Solv, I think it's not more challenging, but it's finding the right people to help from the outset is the hardest thing to do, because we can do pretty much anything. So niching down and trying to find the right people to talk to becomes a bigger challenge than the actual work. So I think that 2021 is going to be super exciting for both of those businesses. One, because it's an established working process, and because we're just helping people grow their business and do business better. And the other, because the potential is so big that it's kind of going to be just exciting seeing where that goes, really.
Brilliant. Wowzers, that's fantastic. We're a great note to close the interview on. Thank you, Chris, so much for your time. And hopefully maybe we can catch up in 12 months' time and just see how both businesses have developed.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We'd be happy to. Yeah, I'm sure we'll stay in touch anyway.
Brilliant. Me too. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching. What was your takeaway from today's interview? Please post it in the comments below, and subscribe for all our upcoming videos, or click for the next video here.